Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the First Unitarian Society of Milwaukee. I'm Reverend Jennifer Nordstrom, and I'm honored to serve this congregation as your senior minister. Here at First Church, our mission is to nurture the spirit, engage the mind, and inspire action. We welcome people of all genders, sexualities, ages, races, ethnicities, histories, and bodies. We welcome your mind, your heart, and your spirit. We welcome everything that you're bringing in with you today and all your heart longs to set down. We welcome the people who are watching us online. Hi, everyone out there. We are streaming this Morter Lecture live. And we'd like to pay a special welcome to any guests who are with us today. If you're visiting and you want to learn more about First Church, you can fill out a visitor card, which is in the pew rack in front of you. There's a basket at the back of the sanctuary. You can drop that visitor card in. Someone will reach out to you. Also, back at that back table, you can find more information about who these First Church Unitarians are and what all we're doing here. So I also want to let you know that if you want hearing assist devices, those are available at the back door near where you came in. And if you need to use the restroom, you go down this hallway. On the left, there are women's and men's restrooms. If you would like to use a gender-neutral restroom, keep going to the end of the hallway and take the elevator or the stairs upstairs, and you'll find 3 gender-neutral restrooms up there. So, if you're watching online, you can enable closed captioning on YouTube on the function that you're watching us online with. And if you're in the room later at the end of the lecture, we're going to have an opportunity to interact with Reverend Tutu. You'll find in the program that you got when you came in the door, there'll be an index card. You see your index card in your program? All right, so during the lecture, if you get excited, interested, something sparks in you and you want to ask a question of Reverend Tutu, something you're curious about or want to go deeper on, write your question on that index card. You can find pens and pencils in the pew rack in front of you. If you need an extra pen or pencil, raise your hand and Usher will bring one to you. And once you've got your card filled out, you can just hold it in the air. One of our ushers will come pick it up from you and bring it to Reverend Kimberly and I at the front. So remember to write your name on the card so we can say who's asking the question, and that'll come at the Q&A part. So, as our practice is in this congregation, we'll begin our afternoon with opening words. Today, they are the poem, A Startling and Brave Truth by Maya Angelou. We, this people, on a small and lonely planet, traveling through casual space past aloof stars across the way of indifferent suns to a destination where all the signs tell us it is possible and imperative that we learn a brave and startling truth. And when we come to it, when we come to the day of peacemaking, when we release our fingers from fists of hostility and allow the pure, cool air on our palms, when we come to it, when the curtain falls on the minstrel show of hate and faces sooted with scorn are scrubbed clean, when battlefields and coliseums no longer rake our unique and particular children up the bruised grass to lie in identical plots on faraway soil. When the rapacious storming of the churches has ceased, when the banners of the world tremble stoutly in the good, clean breeze, when we come to it, when we let the rifles fall from our shoulders and the children dress their dolls in flags of truce, when landmines of death have been removed and the aged can walk into evenings in peace, when we come to it, then we will confess that not the pyramids, with their stones set in mysterious perfection, nor the gardens of Babylon hanging as eternal beauty in collective memory, neither Father Amazon nor Mother Mississippi, who without favor nurture all creatures in the depths and on the shores. No, these are not the only wonders of the world. When we come to it, we, this people, on this minuscule and kithless globe, who reach daily for the bomb and the blade and the dagger, yet who petition in dark with tokens of peace, we, this people on this mote of matter, in whose mouths abide cankerous words which challenge our very existence, yet out of whose same mouths comes songs of such exquisite sweetness that the heart falters in its labor and the body is quieted in awe. We, this people, on this small drifting planet created on this earth, of this earth, have the power to fashion for this earth a place where every man and woman and person can live freely, without sanctimonious piety, without crippling fear. When we come to it, we must confess that we are the possible. We are the miraculous, the true wonders of this world. That is, when, and only when, we come to it. The chalice, the symbol of our UU faith. With that, I'd love to invite up Deborah Klepp, leader of our anti-racism team, to introduce our honored guest.
Nontombi Naomi Tutu and her father, the Nobel Peace Prize recipient, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, have been working for social justice throughout their entire lives, even before their calls to the ministry. They have fought against apartheid in South Africa and have worked toward empowerment of marginalized communities worldwide. And their efforts serve as a reminder that social justice is crucial for creating a fair and inclusive society where everyone has equal opportunities regardless of their ethnicity, their race, their religion or non-religion, their gender, their identity, or socioeconomic backgrounds. So it is truly a pleasure and a delight to have you meet my sister, my friend, Naomi. We have been friends and sister sojourners since we met in Cape Town some 25 years ago. We've pledged to be on this journey of life together. We met in South Africa as sister sojourners, our purpose being to commune with South African women who, like we women from the United States, wanted our journey through this life to mean something, especially in the realm of social justice. So the 20 of us or so lived together, we shared experiences, we met with activists, we learned from one another and helped and supported each other even after our time in South Africa had ended. and we are still growing with our journeys. When Naomi and I met, we became immediate friends, sharing a love of song and poetry and rhythm and dance and deep, deep thought. We also shared and still share a definitive desire to be a part of the solution. And as sisters and as friends do, we commiserate, we uplift each other, we share spiritual inspiration, we giggle, we dance, we debate, and sometimes we disagree. Now, I love me some Naomi, but sometimes she gets on my nerves. She gets on my nerves sometimes because too often she wins our arguments, but she didn't win last night. So let me tell you about this one time we disagreed. While in Minneapolis, where she was receiving an award from the University of Minnesota and Augsburg College, we met for lunch the next day at the International Marketplace. And this is when it started. She wanted macaroons. I wanted a jelly donut. She wanted pasties. I wanted potato salad. I wanted fried chicken. She wanted goat. So we just could not agree on a shared menu, but we got through it. When we finally got to eating, we enjoyed our potpourri of dishes, and we had the best of times until the check came. I took the check from the waiter. Naomi took the check from me. I took it back. I said, "I'm paying. I invited you." She said, "No, I invited you. I'm paying." Then she grabbed the check out of my hands, and we stared at each other, our lips tightening. And I said, "Don't mess with me, girl. I'm from Detroit, and I don't play." So she says, "Well, I'm from Soweto. I'm paying." So peeved, I throw up my hands and say, "Okay, you're from Soweto, you win." Another one argument. But she's my girl. She's my girl. And here's a little more of her background. Naomi was educated in South Africa, in Swaziland, at Berea College in Kentucky, where she took her undergraduate degree. She earned her master's from the University of Kentucky and her master's of divinity from Vanderbilt University. Since being ordained, she has served at parishes in Asheville, Tennessee, in Beverly Hills, California, and now in Atlanta, Georgia. Naomi is still associated with churches in South Africa and travels there regularly to be with her mom and continue her family's work in social justice. Naomi has 2 sisters and a brother. In fact, her sister is here now in the United States raising money for the education of rural South African children. Naomi has a son and 2 daughters, one of whom, Mungi, wrote a book called Everyday Ubuntu, meaning everyday humanity. It's a guide for living with grace, with purpose, with intention, with kindness. And one of my favorite quotes from that book is, "If you think you're too small to make a difference, try spending the night with a mosquito." One of the sister sojourners in Cape Town, her name is Bulewe, introduced me to another book of elegant, poetic prose, and it's called The Invitation. And it has enhanced and deepened the way I've looked at things since then. In it, the author, Oriah Mountain Dreamer, says this: "It doesn't interest me what you do for a living. I want to know what you ache for. And if you dare to dream of meeting your heart's longing. It doesn't interest me how old you are. I want to know if you will risk looking like a fool for love, for your dream, for the adventure of being alive." This book spoke to me of living life with love and compassion and forgiveness and with purpose and without pretense. And Naomi is a woman who embodies all of those characteristics. She lives life with love, with purpose, with compassion, with forgiveness, and without pretense. First Church and friends, let us welcome our sister sojourner, Nontombi Naomi Tutu.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh my goodness. Oh, Reverend Jennifer, how did you allow Deborah to be the one to introduce me? Good Lord. It is such a pleasure to be here with you and to be a part of this program. When Deborah first reached out, I said, well, you know, anytime I get a chance to spend with you, I will take the opportunity. And so it is a double pleasure for me to be here with you and to be with Jack and Deborah as well. So when I spoke to Reverend Jennifer about what would I be thinking of to speak on today, I was struck by where we are as a world at this time. I was struck by how concerned I am by what I see happening in the world, by the divisions, by the words of hate that seem to flow easily from the mouths of so many who are supposed to be our leaders. I felt the concern for what is the world that we will pass on to the next generation. Because I was always taught that we come into this world and for each of us, the one thing that is true for every single one of us, or should be true for every single one of us, is that we try to leave this world slightly better than we found it. And so to look at our world right now, I weep often because it seems as though the loudest voices, the people that we hear the most about, the most powerful, are those who are intent on dividing us. And so I thought of Dr. King's words, where do we go from here? Chaos or community? And I thought, you know, we better start asking ourselves that question again and deeply thinking about what it is we can do to make sure that the choice is community. Because the voices of chaos are loud and are attracting, it seems, more and more people to their way of thinking that if we divide people by race, by religion, by ethnicity, that we, in fact, empower ourselves. That it is in separating ourselves from one another that we will experience the greatest power. And sadly, it seems that their message is catching on. That there is something that is attracting people to the idea of division as being a wonderful thing. And so I decided we're going to ask that question again. Where do we go from here? And if we are those who say we choose community and not chaos, then what are we going to do to ensure that we build community? And I like to tell people that part of my awareness of how important it is that we do something differently came from our time of COVID. And we all suffered through the COVID pandemic, though I must admit that, when people say we were all in the same boat, I say, no, we weren't. We weren't all in the same boat. We all didn't experience COVID in the same way. I am an off-the-charts introvert. So working from home was delightful. I loved being alone. I loved that I only dealt with people on Zoom. I loved that I only went into church twice a week to do our service. I loved it. And I realized that I could love it because I was safe, I was secure, I could order food when I needed it. I knew that if I got sick, I would be taken care of. And yet that was not the story for so many people in this country and around the world. So it was clear that we weren't all in the same boat. That many of those whom we called essential workers, we refused to call essential human beings. That we were willing to sacrifice their health and well-being for our own security and comfort. So clearly, we were not in the same boat. But we were experiencing a pandemic together. And for me, the biggest lesson out of the pandemic came not from us human beings, but from the rest of God's creation. Did you notice that our skies became less polluted? Did you notice that animals and plants returned to places they had not been seen for decades? And it said to me, that should scare us as the human family, that the rest of the world, the rest of creation seemed to heal from our absence. That the rest of creation seemed to sigh a sigh of relief that they didn't have to deal with us in the way that they had been dealing with us all these years. And so it said to me that, if the rest of creation had a vote, they might vote us off the planet. And so, if for no other reason than to convince the rest of creation that we need to be on this planet, we need to be allowed to stay on this planet, then we need to change the way that we are doing what we do in the world, how we interact, not just with one another, but with the rest of God's creation. And so as I thought about today, what came to me was to talk to you in the terms of some African proverbs. And I have to make a confession before I speak to the wisdom of these proverbs, that I did not value these proverbs growing up. African proverbs to me made no sense at all. I am exceedingly literal-minded. What you say to me is what I hear and what I understand. Exactly the words you say. That hidden meanings just zoom right over my head. Deep meanings just fly. Like, no, ma'am, I don't understand. And if you know anything about African proverbs, you will know that they're not like English proverbs. English proverbs, you can hear the lesson in them as they are being spoken, right? The early bird catches the worm. You know what that's saying. It's saying that if you get up early, if you start something early, you're the one who's likely to reap benefit. Why anybody wants to be a bird and catch a worm, I don't know. That's an issue in itself, but at least you can get what is the lesson under that just from listening to the story, right? A stitch in time saves 9. Makes sense. If you correct yourself as soon as it happens, so even as you listen to those proverbs, you can get the meaning behind them. Let me share with you the kind of proverbs I heard growing up. One of my grandmother's favorites was, "The child who doesn't cry dies on its mother's back." Exactly my reaction. What does that even mean? And let's unpack this. So this woman took her child, put her child on her back, and went about her business, and because the baby didn't cry, she forgot that she had the baby on the back until the baby died? I mean, seriously? Have you ever carried a baby on your back? I have. You cannot forget that that person is back there, whether they cry or not. That first of all, there's something on your back that is not a part of you, right? And they don't just stay on there magically. You have had to wrap them and tie them in. So, seriously. And anytime you've had a baby on your back, those people spit up, they move, you don't need to hear the cry to remember that you have another human being on your back. So for me, it was just like, what? Why? Who? And here's what I am saying about African proverbs, because the saying was about being outspoken, that you must speak up in situations of injustice, because if you don't, you are setting up your own oppression and injustice. But couldn't we have found a simpler way, to teach that lesson? I mean, aren't proverbs meant to get you thinking right away what it is they're trying to say? And so, as I grew up, I came to admire and enjoy the wisdom in Proverbs. And the one in particular that I want to talk to today in terms of chaos versus community is one that says, in the times of flood, the wise build bridges, the foolish build walls. Now, when I first heard it, I will not lie, my first thought was, there's a flood. Why are you building anything? Get the heck out of Dodge. That's what you need to do. You don't need to be building bridges or walls. None of that makes sense. But clearly what it is talking about is not a flood. It is talking about in times of crisis, in times of difficulty. And building bridges is about reaching out, reaching beyond the places that you have been comfortable in up until the crisis. It is looking for companions, for allies, for sisters and brothers in places that you probably had ignored during times of comfort. It is about recognizing that when we are in times of trouble, the way that we have always done it is clearly not the way that is going to get us out of it. And probably the people who are going to get us out of it are not the same people whom we have listened to all this time to get us to where we are. That we need new voices, new perspectives, new hearts, new heads, new ideas that often will come from places we had not thought of, from people we had not thought of. That in the time of crisis, the wise realize that our natural focus, the ways in which we have been raised, the ways in which we have done things need to be shaken up. And those who are likely to shake it up are not the ones with whom we have lived, but are those whom we have to reach out to. Those to whom we need to build bridges and ask them to share with us in imagining, in envisioning something new, something that empowers all of us, something that does not look like what we have known. And we have to admit that that is uncomfortable. Change is an uncomfortable thing. Changing the way we have known the world to work is not an easy thing. Changing the things we have known about each other is not a simple exercise. That it calls us to dig deep into ourselves, into our prejudices, into our knowledge of the world, and be willing to know that our wisdom might not be wise after all. That there might be a new wisdom that is needed, and that wisdom comes from those whom we have known as other. Those who don't look like we do, those who don't speak the way we do, those who don't worship the way we do, those who don't think the way we do. And that is an uncomfortable place to find ourselves. And so for me, it has been so enlightening is not the word I'm thinking of. It has been distressing is more the word I'm thinking of. To be hearing the conversations around education in this country where school boards are saying teachers cannot teach subjects and books that make children uncomfortable. Whoever said learning was about comfort? What is it that what have we ever learned from a place of complete comfort? I mean, going to school in and of itself is not comfortable. I would have been happier staying at home and finding things to entertain myself. But my parents and your parents kicked us out of the house, and they didn't make us go just for a day or a month. They made us go for years to these places to listen to people teach us about the world. So how do we expect our young people to learn if our first concern is their comfort? And let's be honest, it's not every child's comfort that they are concerned about. It is not the comfort of African American children, descendants of the enslaved, that is the concern in hiding the stories of slavery, of Jim Crow, of lynchings. It is not the children from our indigenous communities that they are concerned about the level of discomfort when they try to hide the stories of the Trail of Tears. It is not the immigrant population's children whose comfort is the concern. So let's be honest, at least in the critiques of education, to say we don't want evangelical white children to be uncomfortable in class. And let's be honest that that level of discomfort is not likely to kill them. And yet there are young people who are being killed because of our policies. So the proverb says, we are in a time of flood, a time of crisis. Do we have the courage and the wisdom to be those who build bridges? And what does it look like to be those who build bridges? Well, the first is to acknowledge that we are indeed in a time of crisis. That no matter how our individual lives might seem comfortable, that the truth is not just this nation, but our world is in a time of crisis. When hate speech becomes acceptable, we are in a time of crisis. When religious leaders become famous for saying that God wants to kill certain people, we are in a time of crisis. when we talk about more stronger punishment for children who have been raped and want to abort than for their rapists, we are in a time of crisis. When we say that we want to close off our borders to people suffering around the world, we are in a time of crisis. And when we have political leadership that does not want to even deal with those crises, but rather finds pleasure in pumping up the divisions, in hyping up words of hate, we are in crisis. And if we say we are those who believe in community, then we have to make, firstly, our voices heard. A few weeks ago, I was preaching at the church that I serve part-time in Atlanta, and our readings were about what does it mean to be a disciple? What does it mean to speak God's peace into the world? And I said it was striking for me that we were hearing so many Christian voices lifted up in division and hatred. So many Christian voices that were busy stoking divisions amongst God's people. And I said, think back to 9/11 and the time after 9/11, and how we kept hearing people say, you know, okay, people are saying that this isn't all Muslims, but we need good Muslims to speak up and say this is not their faith. We need good Muslims to speak out and say this is not what Islam is about. We need good Muslims to teach us, to show us that when they say Islam is a religion of peace, that it is something that they live out in their lives. And here we are today, and people are rightly saying, where are the good Christians? Where are the voices of the good Christians who are saying hate is not a Christian value? Where are the Christian voices saying division is not the way of our faith? Where are the good Christians telling us about love in that faith? That where are the good Christians who remind us, not just in their words, but in their actions, that the new commandment they were given was to love one another as Christ had loved them? And so, yes, I was talking specifically to my faith community, but it is something that I think we can say to all of us who say we believe in a better, caring world, a world of justice, that where are we then in these conversations? Why are we not hearing more voices saying this is not who we are as a nation, as communities, as the world. Where are we as the voices that are fanning chaos are getting louder and louder? Where are the voices that are saying, we want to build bridges? We want to reach out to those whom we know as other and hear their stories from their mouths. We need to be those who not only speak, but act to reach out. To be those who are courageous in saying, you know, the truth is, I have grown up knowing your community because I have been taught about it through the prejudices of my own. And now I want to truly know you and your community by hearing your stories, by hearing your experiences of our world. And I say that as someone who has often and often found herself responding in ways that come from my own prejudices. One of my favorite stories about myself is that after I finished my master's, I worked in this country in Hartford, Connecticut at a development, an economic development consulting firm, and got to finally get a driver's license, because in South Africa I would have had to get a passbook first stating where I was allowed to be in order to get a driver's license. And so so that we're supposed to get that when we were 16. And so right until I was in my 20s, I kept saying I was 15 when I was stopped by the police. And fortunately, I looked young. And so could get away with that. But so I got a driver's license, and even more dangerously, I got a credit card. And so I went home and wanted to show off to my cousins, so I rented a car, and I was going to drive from Soweto to Munsieville, where my cousins lived. And it was in the midst of one of the states of emergencies in South Africa in the early 80s. And so I'm driving, and I get stopped at a military roadblock, because those roadblocks were around almost all the black townships. And so I got stopped, and growing up in apartheid, we tried to show resistance in small ways, those of us who were not brave enough to be those who showed resistance in big ways and paid by being imprisoned or even being killed. So one of our small ways was to have an attitude whenever you interacted with the police or the military. So when I got stopped, and they tell you to get out of your car, I got out of my car like, and then I looked at the young man searching my car, this young white man searching my car, and I realized he looked terrified. And my thought is, why are you terrified? That's your friends pointing guns at us. There's nobody here who's on my side with a gun. So why are you scared? But I don't know, something just made me start talking to him. Just a regular conversation, nothing deep. I was, saying things like, oh, so how boring is your life that here you are on a Friday night searching people's cars? And so we ended up speaking for those 5-10 minutes that he was searching my car, and this would be an amazingly powerful story if I could say to you right now. So now I am the godmother of his children. And we go on family vacations every few years together. No, it's not that powerful story. I drove away. I don't know who he was. I don't know where he was. But for those few minutes, I allowed myself to see another human being and not simply a white soldier. And for those few minutes, I believed that he allowed himself to see another human being and not simply another potential terrorist. Sometimes building bridges can only be in those incremental steps. 5-10 minutes. An afternoon spent in conversation. And that might be the start. But that start has to then encourage us to move beyond those small, incremental conversations. It has to be what gives us the courage that when we step out of this place this evening, we will look at the world, at ourselves, at those we know as other in a new way. A way that opens our eyes to the ways in which people in our community are hidden from us. Hidden by poverty, hidden by racism, hidden by sexism, hidden by ageism. That how their stories are hidden from us. And be those courageous enough to bring those stories, those people into a shared community, into a shared dreaming space. When I was growing up, my father would give presentations around South Africa, some in black communities, but some also at white universities and to white churches. And he would often say when he was in white communities, he would say, you know, apartheid is going to end. That injustice cannot persevere forever. That a just society is brewing in this country. So come and join the winning side, the side of justice. And that is my call to all of us. Let us be the ones who join the winning side. The side that is about justice. The side that is about building community. The side that is about recognizing our differences as wonderful opportunities for new ways of looking at our world. Let's join the winning side and be those who build bridges and not walls. those who speak for community and not chaos. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So I didn't see any questions coming up. So there's a question here. If you have any questions on your cards, please lift up your cards.
George and Miles, here it comes. I know this is a very curious group. I have every confidence that the questions are coming. Oh, all right, yes. Kimberly gets out her readers and Jennifer holds the question out. No, you're gonna have to do it. You go for it. You go for it.
Yeah. Presently, how do we talk to others who promote book bans, etc., that we cannot abide or appreciate? Support, sorry. For me, they are the other. Sorry, you've got beautiful handwriting, but it's that pencil thing and my age. Yeah, isn't that the conundrum? And I say what I have said to my children in the past is sometimes the time is not right for conversation, that to try and change somebody's perspective. Sometimes what it is the time for organizing in opposition to those positions. I think that so often what happens is we get, and partly because the media has made it seem that this is the predominant position, that that book bannings are supported by the majority. But the media portrays that partly because the same thing that I said, where are the good voices? We are not there at the school board meetings. We are not there at the town hall meetings when people are making those statements. And so it might not be about being in conversation directly with those people right now. It might be that what it is to be in the room with them, counteracting what it is that they are saying. It is that that sometimes they are not ready for conversation. And I am not somebody who says, go into a place where people hate you and try and hug them. That's not where I stand. I do think that the first step is, in fact, making it clear to the rest of the community that there are other voices. And that is what we are missing, the other voices. I'm going to stand in front of the fan for a minute because I am sweating. Okay, is there another one? Go ahead. I'm fine.
I hear you. This sanctuary gets hot. Reverend Tutu, thank you for coming to talk with us, says Patrick. He's very appreciative of your being here. He says he struggles to build bridges because sometimes his turned cheek is slapped. Do you have any advice for him?
Oh, there's a fan right here. Why am I not feeling it? Come here, fan. There we go. Oh, okay. Whew. That's better. Thank you. Deborah told you I was real. I mean, you know, I'm not going to pretend that I'm not hot over here. Yeah, that slap cheek thing. Yeah, you know, one of the things that I say over and over in my sermons at my congregations is, God knew what she was doing when she didn't send me. She sent Jesus. Because there was going to be a whole different gospel if God had sent Naomi. So, so Patrick, I hear you, Patrick. I hear you. And I think that's part of the reason why I said that sometimes the process of building bridges can only be in incremental phases, that it can only be a small step at a time. And as I said in the last one, I am not somebody who says, put yourself into dangerous situations for the sake of building bridges. I don't think that that serves the struggle or the world. I do think that I am grateful for the experience of having met people who have been willing to make those look for bridge builders on the other side. And I'm thinking about people like Betty Williams and Myron Maguire in Northern Ireland, who looked for somebody on the other side of the conflict and said, surely you can see that we are all losing in this. So I admire those who make those steps consistently. But I also know that I too, my cheek gets tired, and there comes a point where I know I won't turn the other cheek. And God's gonna have to forgive me. So, yeah, Patrick, protect that cheek.
I'm paraphrasing this one because I have a squinty situation again. Okay. So there is a crisis in terms of immigration, and we know that sometimes that's the result of war and conflict in people's homes, otherwise they don't leave their homes. Right. So what can we do to be supportive? What can we do in that in the face of that crisis?
My first thing that I have always said, particularly to Americans, is to help refugee crisis, pay attention to your foreign policy. That, that many of the refugees that come to this country come because the governments, the situations in their countries that have been supported by the US have made their lives unlivable at home. And often we in this country have very short-term views of US foreign policy. I'll give you one just quick example. So, do you remember when the Russians were at war in Afghanistan? And the US armed the brave Mujahideen, who were the religious Muslim activists fighting the Soviet Union. And the brave Mujahideen became the Taliban, and we were completely shocked, right? But they had not changed their position. They had said from the time they were fighting the Russians that they wanted the unbelievers swept from their country, that they were fighting for a Muslim caliphate, if you like. But our short-term vision was, let's get the Soviets out of there and then we'll deal with whatever happens. And then we end up dealing with a war that lasts forever, the loss of thousands of US lives, the loss of thousands of Afghani lives, refugees forced to flee, and the Taliban now back in power. So, as somebody who experienced living in a country where the US foreign policy was one that supported the apartheid regime in contrast to the African majority, I would say that when we start, let's start from our own policies and see how they are actually impacting people's lives around the world. And we know, thank you. And I mean, I've spoken about political effects, but also climate effects, that those people who are being forced to flee islands because of flooding are not the people who have been polluting, right? They're not the people who are driving huge SUVs, but their lands are paying the cost of climate change and are having to flee their homes. So again, let us look at our own actions and how they impact people's lives around the world.
We've got a couple of bridge building questions here, and I think we're at the point where we're closing out our question taking moments. But questions about the attempts to try to build bridges across lines of power, oppressed, oppressor. Those can be painful, awkward, sometimes offensive. Do you have any practical tips or strategies about that?
Right.
How could we be part of bridges that are actually in service of people across lines of power and are supportive rather than offensive?
Right. Ooh, that's a wonderful question. And I think if I get it, I might nominate myself once more for the Nobel Peace Prize. Still haven't received it. Not even a certificate of participation. In terms of that, the power dynamic, for me, the first is the acknowledgement of that power dynamic. That when we come into conversations, whether it be around racism, whether it be about socioeconomic issues, that we first of all acknowledge that we do not come into the room from the same places, that our voices have not been historically heard in the same way, and to be willing to make the extra space for those who are marginalized in whatever way to dominate the conversation, because they have not, apart from not being heard, they have not been often in the room where decisions are made around their lives and the opportunities or lack thereof that they will experience. I use an example of being in a conversation at the Fisk University Race Relations Institute, where I worked for a while, and we were having a conversation around racial dialogue, and a white woman in the audience stood up and said, this conversation is scary to me because people are getting loud. And I thought, So my first response was, do you know how menacing I can be in a whisper? Do you know how evil I can be speaking softly? That has been part of a way of silencing particularly Black people, right? Has been, you are too loud for me to hear you. And so to say, let's listen to the content of what is being said and acknowledge that we have been socialized that loudness is aggression. When many of us know the danger of quietness and even silence, right? And so for me, it is when we are talking about having these conversations across power dynamics that we are very clear that we give priority and preference to the voices of those who have largely been silenced, to the voices of those who have not been at the table or who have been told, okay, you're welcome at the table as long as, that we make sure that we do away with the as long as. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Reverend Tutu, for sharing your wisdom with us. It's just such an honor to have you here. Thank you. I want to invite everyone to join us across the hall in the Lean-House Common Room. We'll have a small reception. We have treats from our local BIPOC